Welcome back, everyone, to the PA the FI Way podcast. I'm your host, Kat, and today I have a very well-rounded PA joining me. I have Josh Wageman, and he is going to tell us all sorts of things about his career as a PA and how he's used that to build other forms of income as well, and also talk about his book. So I'm really excited to welcome you to the show today, Josh. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. The best part of all my various adventures is getting to meet really awesome people like yourself along the way.
Likewise, that's absolutely one of the reasons why I love podcasting. I love hosting PAs on here and other clinicians too, hearing all about their stories and how they are doing amazing things outside of practicing medicine as well. So, Josh, could you share with the listeners a little bit about your PA career so far? And then also, what in the world all of the letters behind your name actually mean?
Yeah, so when people see the obnoxiously viscous alphabet soup of letters behind my name, they really need an explanation because like some sort of academic platypus of some sort. It's like, okay, well, these things seem unrelated. How do they work together? What is going on here? So basically, my first doctorate was in physical therapy, and so I went to PT school, and I had pretty shallow reasons for going to PT school. I had extra eligibility where I could run Division I cross country and track, so that's why I went to physical therapy school. And during that time, I got really, really sick, and I believe God uses various circumstances in our lives to catalyze what we're supposed to do when we grow up. And so I fell in love with biochemistry and endocrinology because nobody could really figure out what was wrong with me. And I was like, well, this stuff's pretty interesting, and this is pretty miserable. But in the process of me getting through that illness, I was able to learn a bunch of stuff, and I sort of ignited the fire of being an incorrigible biochemical nerd during that time. And so I practiced as a PT in outpatient orthopedics and a little bit of neuro rehab for years, but there was never any sense of finality that was it. And since I have very few useful skills except going to school and taking tests, I ended up going to the Yale School of Medicine for PA school because I figured that was the quickest means to my end to save the world from all sorts of metabolic derangements or something like that. So that was awesome. I loved PA school so much. I kind of love school anyway. And then during that time, I also became a clinical lipid specialist. And since I can't help myself, I also got my PhD studying cholesterol disturbances in Alzheimer's disease. And then I also am a CSCS, that's a certified strength and conditioning specialist. And that's one of the few personal training type certifications that isn't just a weekend certificate, but you actually have to have some sort of degree in order to sit for that board exam. So anyway, so that's a little bit of what I have done. And I practiced in endocrinology for years as a PA, but currently I actually am a medical science liaison for Amgen. And so all of the things that we're discussing here are independent of the medical strategies and opinions of Amgen. I just have to get that out of the way so we can have our unadulterated fun and the thought police doesn't come after me. But being an MSL is a wonderful job, and that is one of the many avenues that you can have when you have a diverse realm of various scholastic experiences.
Absolutely. I so much appreciate you sharing a bit about your story and how you transition from one career to the next, and how they all intertwine, and how God used an illness in your life to show you other things and maybe better things beyond the place that you were in as well. So it sounds as though you likely recovered from the illness, which grateful for and glad that you're here to share this information with us.
For sure, for sure.
And I'm also looking forward to talking a little bit more about your MSL work a little bit later in the show. But before we do that, I often talk about how wealth and building your income and investing in savings really doesn't matter much if you don't actually have the health and longevity to enjoy it over the years and over the decades to come. I'm curious what you've seen in your patients or colleagues that has really driven that point home.
Such an important point. And I feel like the tension between overemphasizing the pursuit of wealth and being disillusioned with the fleeting things of this temporal realm is an ongoing challenge, and at least it is for me. And I know that that's not unique to me because King Solomon himself, who was richer, smarter, and better than I am at everything, understood that you can't take any of your stuff or your credentials with you when your time's up. And so, but I derive a lot of encouragement from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. And if you read that closely, a lot of people think, oh, it's so depressing. It's actually not depressing at all, because what he says is the pursuit of wealth as the ultimate goal is meaningless, but life itself is such a gift. And if we're good stewards of our wealth and leverage what we've been given to maximize our relationships and those experiences, then it makes life worth living. And it really just it breaks your heart because I've had so many patients over the years, and they work so hard, and even colleagues, and they work so hard to get to retirement. But while they're pursuing their vocational and financial goals, they miss out on their families. They mortgage their own personal health, and then they lose their joy in the journey. And then finally, they get to retirement, but their identity is so wrapped up in their career that they're so unhealthy, both physically and mentally and otherwise, that they can't even enjoy retirement. And so I think recognizing the potential for this to happen early on, and that need and that ever elusive need for balance is key for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I share about my passion for pursuing financial independence, not just to be rich and to be able to spend money, but it's so that you can enjoy your life along the way and not only have a few short lived years of retirement once you actually get to quote unquote retirement age. And it's important to think about, are you enjoying your life along the way? Can you retire early if you build your wealth earlier and invest more aggressively? And then you can actually enjoy a health span in the future and be able to do and see the things that you want to do and spend the time with the people that you want to spend time with. So I'm really excited to hear your perspective on these things too.
100%.
And you're really passionate about cardiac health as well as brain health. And you wrote a book called The Home Security System and the Lipid Neighborhood. And then you also wrote a remixed edition of that too. But I'm also curious what inspired you to write the book as well as the second edition? And then what surprised you most about the writing process from publishing to marketing the book overall?
Yeah, so I've actually used a lot of the metaphors in my books with my patients over the years, and then I teach lipid physiology across the country, and I'm adjunct faculty at multiple medical programs, and I go on lots of podcasts and do lots of talks because I'm really big on helping people understand how to not have heart attack, strokes, and dementia. And I say I like to bring clarity and hilarity to cholesterol and cardiovascular disease because it has historically been a contentious, confusing, and controversial topic. And a lot of times you'll have a shirtless influencer on Instagram telling you one thing, and then you'll have some sort of well-renowned doctor saying another thing, and nobody knows what to believe. And things get very tribal, and it's not really rooted in anything except who can scream the loudest. And so my goal for everyone is I want you to have a great home security system, and I want you to have a safe lipid neighborhood. Your home security system has four basic pillars: normal blood sugar, normal blood pressure, keep inflammation low, and don't smoke or do drugs because those are bad. But then your lipid neighborhood, that's your cholesterol panel, because every ApoB containing lipoprotein, the vast majority of those being LDL particles, are potentially criminals that can infiltrate your arterial abode, and the LP particles, if you pick the wrong parents with that genetic risk factor, those are the felons, because per particle, they're about 6.5 times as likely to cause mischief if they get into your arterial wall where they don't belong. And so, across your lifespan, no matter what your cholesterol panel is, nobody ever said, boy, I wish I was more insulin resistant. Nobody ever said, I wish my blood pressure was out of control. Life is not better, more inflamed than less inflamed, and then drugs are still bad. Those are those four pillars that are constant and axiomatic in your home security system. And there are very few things that you can take to the bank in biology. A lot of times the answer is, it depends. But with our cholesterol panel, it might look on paper like you're living in a rough inner city lipid neighborhood, but people don't live on paper. So do we have better ways to inform our decision-making process if it means considering to move to a safer gated community with fewer lipid criminals? We do. It's one of my catchphrases, because I have lots of them, is got plaque, get a CAC. What's a CAC? Coronary artery calcium score. I call it the colonoscopy of the heart without the nasty pregame show, because anybody who's going to bowel prep for colonoscopy knows that that will temporarily wreck your bathroom and ruin your social life. But with a CAC, all you do is lay down, and it's a low-dose CT, about the same amount as a mammogram, that shows if you have calcified plaque in your coronaries or if you don't. And if you do, that's a late finding in the process. That means there's been a break-in. And you cannot have atherosclerosis without a cholesterol laden perpetrator in the wrong place at the wrong time, which sets off the maladaptive immune response resulting in plaque that can later result in clinical events if we don't do something about it. And so that's my basic framework for people. And I would use it with my patients, I would use it with my students, and people tended to vibe with me because I love esoteric biochemical pathways more than anybody, but I need to have friends. And nobody wants to be your friend if all you're doing is getting into the weeds and people are nodding and they're not understanding anything that you say. And then you're left alone in your closet with your biochem textbook. And that's not what I want. And so it kind of was born from that. And enough people told me that I just needed to write a book. And so one day I was like, all right, I need to do this. And I have been blessed so much and I've been given so much. And I feel like it's the way that I can give back and hopefully help some people out on their journeys. And it's been a real interesting ride actually since writing that book. And then I can't help myself. I write lots of stuff all the time, but there were like 12 people worldwide who are my lipidologist nerd friends who wanted even more. And I'm like, okay, fine. So that's where I wrote the remix second edition for the clinician and anyone on a mission for more lipid tuition, because sometimes I rap about these things. And if you find me at a lipidology or cardiovascular conference, a lot of times I will rap about lipids at dinners if you play your cards right, if that's what the people want. But anyway, so so I did that, and so anyway, and I'm sure that I will update those at some point as we get new data and new clinical trials are completed and whatnot. But the whole process of writing the book and learning the logistics of publishing, because I'm very, very bad at logistics. I'm very, very bad at most things, except, going to school, taking tests, and then talking about all the stuff I've learned and hopefully not being boring when I write about it or talk about it. But anyway, that's been interesting to learn about those logistics. And also, I've learned that people just don't read. It's very rare actually to find people that read. And so I did record an audiobook, and I figured it was either me or Morgan Freeman, and I guess he was busy, shockingly. So I went and recorded my own audiobook, and that has been a good thing because a lot of people will pop it into their car on their commute or on their phone, and then they'll listen to it there. And you can't learn lipids in one day or 1 week or even 1 year. And I've been blessed to learn a bunch of stuff. I learn stuff every day. And so it's one of those topics that you just have to continually gain exposure to in order to have some degree of mastery. But I think it's worth knowing just because, cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of people across the globe. And if we have a better understanding of how to mitigate those things, we can help shift the paradigm from reactionary to preventive when it comes to cardiovascular disease and also neurodegenerative disease.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious with publishing your books, was it all the self-publishing route? And then same with the audiobook, was that all self-publishing or what route you went with that?
Yeah. So if you know people, sometimes you have an in with a larger publishing company. And for me, my whole goal with this is not to make millions of dollars or something. I mean, my royalty half the time has been like 14 cents just because I want it to be readily available. And I've had five or so medical practices buy it in bulk for their patients as a resource, which is really what I want out of it. I would just want people to laugh a little, learn a little, and then come away with more ownership of the process and actually understand why we might be recommending something as clinicians. Because I think that all too often clinicians or anybody else is saying, do this because I'm a doctor or I'm a PA or whatever credential is. And I don't think that's a great reason. I think it's helpful to have an understanding both as a clinician and as a patient so you can arrive at that conclusion together because your goal, both of your goals is going to be to not have heart attacks, strokes, and down the line dementia. It's just how do we get there? And it's always better and there's more buy-in and there's a lot more adherence if we get there together. And so I've been, pleased with that. And my whole goal has not been anything really more from a lucrative standpoint financially. As far as the publishing, I did self-publish, and my cousin's actually an author herself, and so she was really, really helpful for me in understanding how to do that and streamline that process. And so that was my goal there. And so it just depends. With self-publishing, what's nice about it is there's less of a wait time. If you've got a story to tell and you want to get it out to the world, then it's a lot quicker than hopefully getting some sort of other publisher to read your stuff, and then maybe they decide to, maybe they don't, and the turnaround time is a lot greater there. So I went with the self-publishing route for both my lipid books and then the audiobook.
Sure. That makes sense. And then it sounds like that publishing a book and writing a book was not necessarily to make this giant income as you alluded to, but perhaps it's helped with things like credibility and impact and helping patients and providers alike. What other advice would you give to healthcare professionals thinking about writing a book, or what type of impact could books have if they decide to write one?
Yeah, so there's a one of my favorite quotes is from Toni Morrison, and she said something to the effect that if there is a book that you would like to read and it hasn't been written yet, you must write that book. And basically, you have a story. Everybody has a story, and only you can tell that story. AI can't do it for you, and nobody else can do it for you. And so I feel like if you have something to say, then do it in your unique way. And hopefully somebody out there will need to hear that and be encouraged by it. And I think that if you are compelled to do it, you got to do it. And so that's how I feel there. And then although my ultimate goal has not been for some sort of financial gain, it is, I think, helpful for impact, for leverage, and also to potentially open up other doors for educational opportunities, for other things. And when people are aware of maybe what book you've written, then they have you come, and it's allowed me to have greater opportunities to be a guest speaker at other medical programs and things of that nature. And so it does open up doors beyond just the income that you might be getting from the book itself. And so I do think that particularly whatever someone's goal is, it can be leveraged for greater financial incentive if that's somebody's goal. But ultimately, I think that people have a lot to offer. And if you've been given something and you're a clinician and you have some experience and it has helped shape you and you've learned some things along the way, well, pass it along, because I bet a whole lot of other people would love to hear your story. So I encourage people, if you are considering writing a book, go do it for sure. Because I want to read your story too.
That's great advice. And then we talked a little bit earlier about how cardiac screening can be confusing for both patients and clinicians alike, and many can fall into the default of just checking their lipid panel. You touched on how CACs can be a great test to look into as well. I'm curious, are there other tests that are worth the cost and the effort for long term heart health? And then do you feel like age or family history changes the picture too?
So picking the right parents always matters. A lot of these factors that result in premature coronary disease are genetically inherited, unfortunately. But there are ways to get ahead of the game, and you can't treat what you haven't identified. And so I think identifying those things early is really important. Now, there are so many different tests you can get. And in my books, I talk about the advanced lipid panels, and you can get NMR spectroscopies of the various subfractionations of VLDL, LDL, and HDL particles. And then you can get markers of sterol absorption and production like campestrol, sitosterol, desmosterol, ethosterol, and then you can get into the weeds with myeloperoxidase and LPPLA2 and all these different inflammatory mediators, and what to do about them is another conversation. And so a lot of times people hear somebody give a talk and they'll hear, oh, ApoB is a great biomarker or something, and then they'll start getting all these fun tests, which I think are fun because I know what to do about them. But then they have a whole bunch more data and they're like, uh-oh, darn it. And so then, phone a friend or something. But still, I think that if a test is actionable and you understand it and it's going to influence your decision-making process, then by all means, run that test. Now, in general, though, for the run-of-the-mill clinician who's trying to really get ahead of the game when it comes to cardiovascular disease, I don't think you need all the bells and whistles that I like to do and that people would come to me expecting me to run because he's a lipid specialist and he writes books about this stuff, which is fine. But I think that one of the things, in addition to your basic cholesterol panel, your basic lipid panel, you need an LP little a. The recommendation is to check for LP little a, that felon of the lipid neighborhood, at least once in a person's lifetime, because it's an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. You can have an otherwise really good looking lipid neighborhood, and you can have an otherwise pristine home security system as far as the pillars of normal blood sugar, normal blood pressure, inflammation, and not doing drugs, and still get broken into if you have elevated Lp(a). In chapter 6 of my book, I talk about one of my friends, my good friend, who his 10-year risk calculator, which I am not a fan of risk calculators. They miss so many people. And one recent study showed that even the new Prevent risk calculator, 51% of people in the low risk category had a positive calcium score when they got CACs. And so if your risk calculator is missing over half the people, well, why are we even using this half the time is my thing. And understanding the individual utility of each biomarker, I think, is key. But anyway, his CAC was 2,814 and his 10-year risk
Wow.
calculator was 2.3%. And so he had to have a 5-vessel coronary artery bypass graft. And so, but, we checked LP(a). His family history was telling me a terrible story. And we were out on a run. He's telling me about all of the atherosclerosis in his family. I'm like, dude, have you gotten a
Mm.
CAG and LP(a)? He's like, no, what's that? And so we did. And thankfully, he was able to get that done. And 1 year after his bypass, he actually finished the half Ironman and qualified for Worlds even because he's a rock star. But anyway, but that's the sort of thing that happens. And those are the sort of things that just by checking LP(a) and also that CAC, got plaque, get a CAC, is one of my favorite catchphrases, we can identify disease and then intervene appropriately from there. And obviously there are limitations to like a CAC. You're not going to go and get a CAC in your 12-year-old kid. That's not the appropriate test for those people. And then rarely there are people who have calcium scores of 0 who have events, but typically those people have diabetes or insulin resistance and are smoking and maybe have elevated LP(a) or all of those things, and their family history typically will be indicative that you're not feeling so good about them even at a younger age. And we have other bells and whistles. CT angiography is like a CAC on steroids. It gives you the soft plaque and degree of stenosis and some of the high risk plaque features. There's also other imaging techniques such as iliofemoral ultrasound, CIMT with plaque assessment, and other ways to identify disease in vascular beds before it becomes problematic. And so we have lots of different tools and ways to identify disease and intervene accordingly. But in addition to your basic cholesterol panel, I'd say get an LP(a), consider an ApoB because particles dictate risk. It's not just the mass of cholesterol that actually defines your lipid-mediated risk. And so if somebody has an LDL cholesterol of 100 and their ApoB is elevated, that's a lot more concerning than somebody who has an LDL cholesterol of 100, but they have a lower ApoB, just because every particle is potentially a criminal that can get into your arterial abode, and particles dictate risk, the number of particles rather than just the mass of cholesterol. And so those are some things to think about. But in general, LP(a) and get a CAC. And when to start a CAC is an interesting discussion. I used to say, hey, starting at age 40, just fire up a 0, check back in 3 to 5 years. But there was a recent study that showed that the mean age of incident CAC in white males was 36.1. So it's like, ooh, well, maybe we start a little sooner. And then I kind of treat it like a colonoscopy. If somebody has a raging family history of early disease, then I'll start getting them sooner. And the power of non-zero is very significant in a younger person. And so let's say somebody age 35 gets a calcium score and it's 10. Well, that's not very high. Oh, yeah, it is for your age. And so people who have a calcium score above 0, age 32 to 46, from the Cardiac Consortium have a 5x risk of a premature event. So you can get a calcium score in a younger person. And I would say the power of non-zero is very, very significant in that demographic, whereas the power of 0 in midlife is in an asymptomatic person is pretty powerful as far as you're feeling pretty good, at least in the short term, about not croaking off from a major adverse cardiovascular event.
I so much appreciate you sharing all those details with me. I had started my career in family medicine, and for the past 5 years, I've been in outpatient psychiatry. So, back, 5 plus years ago, for my first 6.5 years of practicing, we were just checking lipids, doing the 10-year risk score. So, it's so interesting to hear how things have changed. And I'm also curious, Josh, do you feel like in practice that people are checking these other tests versus only defaulting to lipid? And is that cardiology that's doing that and lipid specialists that are doing that? Or are primary care providers being encouraged to do this now?
Yeah, it depends on if they've come to my dinner talks or not. And so the PCPs in my area all check these things. And I'm big on getting ahead of the game when it comes to insulin resistance as well. Insulin resistance, impaired fasting glucose, prediabetes, diabetes are kind of like being almost pregnant. You are or you aren't. It's a matter of how far along you are in that process. And so identifying insulin resistance in its infancy is huge for me as well. And in addition to your CMP, I like to add a fasting insulin because if you're producing way too much insulin to keep your blood sugars normal, that's a harbinger of complications down the line, in addition to your A1C and your glucose that you already have from your metabolic panel. So just tacking on fasting insulin is super, super low-hanging fruit, high-yield stuff for clinicians as well in that regard. And so it just depends, and some preventive cardiologists are really on it, some aren't. Some PCPs are really, really on it, some aren't. And no matter who you are, if you're a primary care person, if you're a specialist, I just think that we all ought to have ownership of cardiovascular disease because we're going to see it all over the place and we can do so much about it. And so those are my feelings there. And even if you're just I have the same conversations that I have with cardiologists and with random people on airplanes that I meet because I just talk a lot. But really, I mean, there have been people who have read my book who have gone into their doctor and asked for a coronary artery calcium score or an Lp(a) or both, and they've been able to identify disease and then intervene accordingly. And that's really great. We want to get ahead of the game, and not knowing doesn't make things go away.
Absolutely. And let's transition a little bit to talking about your roles that you've had outside of clinical medicine. Many PAs and other clinicians feel really boxed into their clinical work. And I hear a lot of times they feel stuck or feel like MSL or other non clinical roles out there are super hard to get into. I'm curious, why do you feel like the mindset is so common that they're stuck in this clinical work? And also, how has exploring multiple degrees, certifications, and roles shaped your own career satisfaction over the years?
Yeah, so I think that all of us who go into medicine go in for altruistic reasons. We really want to help people. And a lot of times we ourselves have had various experiences that have shaped our desire to help people in ways that maybe somebody helped us. And so you go through school and you kind of get this romanticized ideal of what clinic is going to be like. And it's super fun. And you're out there and you're finally done with school and you pass your boards. And you're like, woo, let's do this thing. And then you realize that the medical system sometimes fights you, and it's tough actually, and you're drowning in seas of prior authorizations, and then it seems like nothing ever ends, and then you feel just pigeonholed into this menagerie, and it's not what you thought it would be. And it's almost like your expectations were too high going in, and now you're very, very devastatingly disappointed because you love seeing patients. At least, I mean, I love patient care. Just seeing patients is wonderful, but it's the other stuff that just crushes you, and it really, really takes a toll on you. And it definitely humbled me so much. It just crushed me, and your work-life balance is virtually null, and there's nothing there, and so that's really tough for people. And I know that was really tough for me. However, what I'll say is the more diverse your background and the more diverse experiences you have, the more it can potentially open up avenues outside of clinic. And maybe you're still doing clinic, but maybe it's part-time, or maybe you're actually doing something that is liberating and cathartic for you and freeing simultaneously, and getting a little more balance in your life rather than just feeling inundated by the weight of all the prior authorizations and all your inbox that seems to, as soon as you make headway on it, then it fills back up, and all the things that go into clinical practice. It's tough out there. It's tough. And so I have a lot of compassion for people who get into that, and you aren't learning that in school. I mean, school's the best. That's why I went forever, and then you get out there and you're like, oh shoot, real life is that's a little rough. And so I do think though that, actually having a love of learning is super important no matter who you are. And I clearly do love learning and have kind of a restless mind. And you can draw on that love of learning to potentially open up doors outside of the clinic. And then the clinical experiences you have are invaluable. And as you transition to other roles, whether it be in the pharmaceutical industry or other medical affairs roles or something entrepreneurial, your experiences that you have as a clinician will help you big time as far as have relatability with other clinicians, and also be able to impact people in ways that are outside of that direct patient care.
Yeah. And transitioning to the next question to build on that, which skills do you feel like have been the most valuable outside of the clinic? And then how did you leverage them as an MSL?
So you can't fake passion, and I love people and I love learning, and I'm honestly a simple guy who likes to think about complicated things. And so it's kind of amazing that as a medical science liaison, you basically get to learn and teach. And your goal, and my goal always, is to help clinicians help their people, and particularly in the realm of cardiometabolics, as far as not having heart attack, strokes, and dementia. This is awesome. I get to help those clinicians help the people that I care about so much. And, people have their conceptions about the pharmaceutical industry, but at the end of the day, pharmaceutical industry makes tools that can help the people I love. And whatever you believe and your perceptions about what big pharma is or isn't and all that, well, whatever. Do you understand the biochemistry of this tool, and can this tool help somebody that I care about, whether it be my patient, whether it be a family member, or whether it be myself? And so I think that that's really, really important. And you really use that passion and your passion for people ultimately, and then you get to continue learning stuff. And then if you can use what you've learned to help the people you care about, that's pretty awesome. And really, I am very, very thankful, very, very blessed to be an MSL, and then also get to do my side hustle stuff, which is a lot more teaching and talking. And you ask what skills that I have. Well, I have very few, but I do really like learning, and I do love people, and I think that hopefully comes through whenever I'm talking or writing or spending time with somebody.
I'm also curious if you could share how you made the transition from clinical work as a PA to MSL work, and then what does a typical day in the life of a MSL actually look like?
So I don't think there is such thing as a typical day in the life of an MSL. Sometimes it's actually tricky. It's really good because the work-life balance for an MSL is non-pareil, but there isn't as much structure, and you have to kind of create your own magic and your own schedule and stuff, which for me I like to show up and just let me go. If I get to the place, I'll show up, wind me up, and I'll go all day. And so when you're having to create your own opportunities, that can sometimes be a little exhausting for people who are not as logistically inclined, like myself. I feel like I need a secretary. But anyway, so that happens for me. That said, it's really, really, really neat. And I think that you, as far as the typical day, ideally I have appointments. I'll have breakfast appointments. I'll have lunch appointments. I'll have dinner talks. I do a ton of dinner talks. Like almost every week, I'll do a dinner talk, and what I say is, hey, even if you hate whatever I say, it's free food. Let Big Pharma do something right for once. And so I basically bribe people to be my friends by wining and dining them. And so, but anyway, no, but really people start coming and they're like, oh, wow, we can actually learn something and get some good food in the process. Well, isn't that the dream? Lipids and lunch with Josh. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, so people end up hopefully enjoying that. And then I'm very, very blessed to be able to help people help their patients. And so that's what it kind of looks ideally. And then sometimes in MSL, you travel to various conferences and you go work at conferences and whatnot. And then I teach a lot of like the new hires at our company, and I teach lipid physiology everywhere. So I teach it at my company as well. And so depending on your skill set, hopefully they will recognize that, and then they will help you use your and draw from your experiences to do whatever it is within the company structure and framework as well. And there's ongoing clinical trials that you support depending on the molecule also. And so as far as transitioning to an MSL, that was another one of those very unexpected things. I didn't even know what an MSL was when I first went into practice. And, I love talking with people. And so all the sales reps from various companies would come in and we'd start talking, and then I'd start getting off in the weeds on some crazy topic like I do. And the salespeople would be like, "Oh, you need to talk to our MSL." I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And so I learned what an MSL was, and I quickly became friends with all the MSLs. And I was like, "Oh, this is pretty cool." But I would just hang out with them because I want to be on the cutting edge of the cardiometabolic approach to things, and I want to be aware of what's going on. So anyway, so then basically it was really I was in some really weird situations clinically that were almost preposterous as far as well, how little I was making as far as financial compensation goes. At one point, I was making $14 an hour with no benefits, which is true. And you can ask my wife, and she was pretty mad. But anyway, so there are some really weird things, really bizarre things. There was some kind of my personal privacy was compromised at one point for factors outside of my control, as far as people getting access to my personal cell phone that shouldn't have had them and haranguing me all night long, every night. Anyway, it was bizarre. So there's all these terrible things that happened. And I was humbled by this because I love patient care and I was getting absolutely destroyed for all these reasons. And then one of the MSLs, who was my friend, he shoots me a text. He's like, "Hey, I just got promoted to medical director. I think you'd be good at this. Good luck." And so I was like, "Oh, I hadn't even thought of that." And so anyway, I interviewed there and God knew what I needed more than I did. And so that was how I transitioned to industry. I did not see that coming because like I said, I really enjoy patient care, but I needed to reset. I needed to hit a giant reset button on my clinical experience. And now I'm hopeful that I can kind of dip my toe back in actually to clinical practice. I've actually been approved to for a PRN type position and possibly a lipid concierge type thing in the future. And so, but I really needed a reset button because there were all sorts of weird, crazy things going on that led me to this role. But I'm really grateful that I was led there.
Wow. Yeah, sorry to hear all that. That sounds like maybe people were taking advantage of you, unfortunately, in various ways, and that doesn't sound like a good situation at all.
I learned a lot. I learned a lot about many things beyond the realm of biochemistry during my clinical experience for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds as though MSL sort of perhaps fell into your lap a little bit with the connections you made, the networking you made, and that this person called you up and said, "Hey, apply for this," and encouraged you to do so. I'm curious though for listeners that are interested in really pursuing MSL as the next step for them, what practical, realistic first steps would you encourage that they start doing now?
For sure. And so, what I'll first say is the magic is in the person, not the credential. And so, I feel like clinicians, and particularly PAs, and yeah, I'm biased, I am one among many other things, they make really good MSLs. However, a lot of the companies, they want you to have a doctoral degree of some kind. I have a couple, which is nice because I just go to school forever, but that's not always the case. And so they do like to do that. Sometimes they actually won't give people an interview or their candidacy won't be as considered as robust because they don't have that credential, which I don't agree with. But when people talk to me about this and are considering being MSL, and you're free to, anybody who's listening to this, seriously, reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you're not creepy, I will help you. I'm a terrible businessman, but I'm a good friend. And so I will help you in your, whether it be your cardiovascular health, your understanding of biochemistry, or just your career path. I'm happy to help you. But anyway, so feel free to reach out to me if you want some more details there. But what I do typically encourage people to do is pursue like a DMSC. So there's a lot more DMSC programs. And I think one of the big reasons why they have these programs is for people who want to potentially shift into industry, into medical affairs, into pharmaceuticals, just because that's something that, although it doesn't necessarily it shouldn't matter necessarily, it does. And so that's like my little practical advice to somebody who is considering that shift. And a lot of times when you're working through your DMSC, a lot of these programs are pretty flexible and a lot of it's online and you can pursue that as you're working clinically. And I think that it's nice too because it gives people hope, gives you something to look forward to if you feel pigeonholed into your current clinical position. Hey, work towards that. And then I bet you there'll be other opportunities that open up. And then you can really leverage your clinical experience if you end up shifting to an MSL type role and you have such relatability with clinicians. People who have never been clinicians themselves, I feel like they can be really smart and, all these people have all these advanced degrees and whatnot, but I feel like there's something lacking in the realm of relatability. As a clinician, you've been in the game, you've been in the trenches, you understand that, and you're seen as less of a pharmacill and more of a friend. And that's, I think, really, really important.
Yeah, you touched on several things there. And like you said, nothing really replaces that clinical experience that a PA can bring to an MSL role. So if the PAs out there listening, you're interested about a non-clinical role, reach out to Josh and he'll answer your questions or connect with other PAs or other clinicians that have transitioned over to that role too and ask them lots of questions and see if that might be a good fit for you for the future.
100%. And keep making connections. Just talk to people, you know? That's easy for me just because that's all I do. But really, you never know who you're going to meet. And so just put yourself out there, be genuine, and then those doors will open.
Absolutely. So important to continue to network in an authentic way and make those connections throughout your career too. And Josh, as we're winding down, I'm curious with all that we've talked about for this episode, what's the key idea that you hope the listeners carry away for their own careers and their own lives overall?
So I'd say don't get so caught up in the doing that you miss out on the being. You know, life is such a gift, and the most priceless gifts are the people you meet along the way, and all the adventures I've had, all the amazing, amazing individuals that I would not have otherwise met. And so go ahead, chase your dreams, but don't get so caught up in that pursuit that all you end up with is a fistful of wind because you can't ever catch the wind. Don't even try to catch it. But if you find the beauty in the process of whatever you're doing, you'll have a lot of joy during these adventures and you're going to be blessed with a lot of friends along the way. And it's a pretty fun ride.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much for sharing. And if any of the listeners are wanting to reach out, connect with you, follow along, see what other books you have out there, where can they find you and connect and learn more?
So I now have a website. My buddy Chris, he's phenomenal. He built a website called lifelovelipids.com. And so you can check that out. And I write a lot of blogs and lots of things that can hopefully help you laugh a little, learn a little, and wax nostalgic at times and make you think. So there's a lot of podcasts on there that I've been on too that are nice educational resources and other videos. And then my book, The Home Security System in the Lipid Neighborhood, you can find it from the book link on that website, or you can just go to Amazon and find it there. And hopefully that's a good time for you. And if you don't read books, there's an audio book, so you can check that out. And then on LinkedIn, you can find me there and shoot me a message there. And then I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter. Usually it's just some lipid nerds nerding out about things there. You can check that out if you'd like, but that isn't quite as profound. I'm on Instagram for some reason. I have no idea what's going on there. I don't think I'm young enough or cool enough to really have an Instagram presence, and so I would skip that if I were you. But typically, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn and you check out the lifelovelipids.com, you'll probably find what you're looking for there.
Wonderful. I thoroughly appreciate all of your nerdiness and all of the wealth of knowledge that you have gained over the years and have decided to share with clinicians and patients alike. Thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate you being on the show. And I hope that the listeners decide to reach out and connect if they'd like to.
Thanks for having me.